Hi, everyone. This is Ayana, your life and soft skills coach. Happy Saturday to you all, or whatever day you're checking this out. Now, this video is going to be all about the misconceptions around abuse. And I've been wanting to do a video like this for a while because I've been having conversations with, friends of mine and loved ones who, when they heard about somebody in an abusive relationship, they often wondered, how is it that somebody could stay, right? How is it that somebody could stay? And I wanted to talk about what I feel like are big misconceptions and misunderstandings to help with some clarity. And what motivated me to do this now, actually, is the death of Tina Turner and some conversations I've been having with clients of mine around their abusive relationships. So let's go ahead and dive on in. Now, as we all know, Tina Turner, amazing musical icon, and she's was well known for her music and her contributions to our culture, which are amazing. And she's also known as well for her abusive relationship with Ike. And one of the things that she talked about afterwards when people were interviewing her about it was that she was kind of brainwashed and she didn't have the language to fully express how powerful it was. And it got me to thinking, and I think I've made some discoveries over the past few years. Now, I myself, I was also in an abusive relationship, so I've lived this firsthand. So I've come up with the top misconceptions around abuse. And forgive me, I'm going to be looking at my notes a little bit so I can make sure I get my terms exactly right. So first things first, let's understand abuse and what it is. So abuse is really at its core about power and domination. It's about power over other people. And it's about making others feel less than so that the abuser feels whole or better about themselves. And it's about doing or saying harmful things to other people. And then when you're called out on it, kind of, using gaslighting or other techniques to make the other person feel as though it's their fault or it wasn't as big of a deal as you set out, as they feel like it is. It really is about, making people feel as though what they do, making the victim feel as though what they do is never good enough. And all of that leads to really horrible self-esteem issues and confidence issues, as I can attest to. Okay, so it really at its core is about making other people feel small so that the abuser feels bigger. Okay, and so here is the first misconception that I tend to hear a lot when it comes to abuse, is that way more of us have been victims of abuse than we realize. Okay, I would venture to say that, we are all susceptible to influence and that most of us have actually been the victims of abuse at one point or another, whether it was bullying when we were kids or whether it was, kids being mean. Kids have no filter, right? So they say a lot of messed up things, right? So whether it's kids, whether it's a toxic workplace, whether it's a romantic environment, whether it's a family member, a parent, okay, a friend, right? Most of us have been abused or have been the victims of abuse at one point or another without realizing it. So we have to start to, stop treating it as though it's something that only happens to a small subset of people, okay? Because it's a very, very, very common. In a toxic workplace, what it might look like is, that you are working over and beyond your schedule. You're doing the work of yourself plus a little extra, or maybe there was one other person in your department who's no longer there and you're doing part of their work, right? You haven't had an increase in pay, and your supervisor or boss is constantly talking about what you're not doing, that you're not good enough, that you're not doing enough, that your work is not good enough, etc., right? That you're not committed enough, that you don't care enough, that you're not showing a good enough work ethic. All of that is abusive. And raise your hand, all of us who have experienced a toxic boss or two, right? It's no fun. And what's terrible about that, the worst part of all that is the gaslighting, right? The making you feel that you are not good enough or that you don't care enough or that you are not doing enough. And what it makes you do at work is it makes you try to do even more, right? Even more to try to impress them. But the person who has that abusive behavior, especially a boss who has authority, they're never satisfied, right? They might throw out a little bones here and there to keep you kind of from completely quitting right away, but they're never fully satisfied and they're always going to find something to pick at and nitpick at, okay? So here is the important thing about abuse. This is the second one. not number three, number two. We are all susceptible to abuse because, again, a healthy mind takes in criticism and feedback, and they try to take complaints seriously. Okay, so in the case of the boss, right? If the boss says, "Hey, you're not doing enough," or "I feel like you're not committed enough," most of us are going to take that as truthful, but we're not. Most of us are not looking at it from the lens of the abusive person, right? The lens of the abusive person is through power. I want power over you. I feel better about myself when I am dominating you, when I have power over you and your life, and I can snap my finger and make you feel off guard, right? When I can make you feel a certain kind of way, right? So it's a power trip for them versus our approach, which is just trying to be solution oriented, right? So it is a very hard position to be in because you trust what the person is saying to you. You trust that when they are complaining about something, that it is coming from a real place, and you try to rectify it, which makes sense. And so here is, the third thing that comes up is that a lot of us were also taught to discount our feelings and emotions. This is another thing that we don't realize, and this plays right into abuse. So many of us were taught that emotions are bad, especially sadness. Sadness is weakness. Sadness is, means that you can't handle it, that you're not tough enough. But all that does is it manipulates us into trying to prove ourselves to people who are abusive and don't really have our best interests at heart anyway. So when we are, taught to discount our feelings, and especially this happens so much with our peer groups, it's astounding, right? And I feel especially bad for men because men are taught this as well. But our emotions are important indicators. They are important protectors of our safety. They are there to kind of let us know when things are inappropriate or not okay. They are powerful protection. So discounting them means that we will only stay in bad situations and toxic situations longer. Okay. Now, the fourth thing that also comes up too is that abuse usually doesn't start right away. Okay. So it usually comes after there is a bond formed or trust built. Okay. Or love. So if you are in a romantic abusive relationship, then usually what happens is it's a few months in after a love bond has been established, right? And so, that person has shown you a lot of vulnerability, right? And then you start to connect with them. You start to believe in that person and you start to feel connected to them. Same thing with a friendship or, a familial relationship. If it's a supervisor or a work relationship, it may not be love, but there's been trust built, right? So, when we first meet people are generally on their best behavior. And so after time has gone on, do we start to see more of their characters starting to peek out? So because there has been trust established because that person is a supervisor, and so you're trusting their perspective, or it is a love bond or a bond from family, you are more likely to take in what they're saying as truthful, right? You're more likely to accept it as truthful. And then that can knock you off course and really affect your self-esteem. Okay, so now let's talk about the next misconception, that a lot of us also too experience abusive relationships with our parents. Okay, so if you grow up with overbearing parents who are always kind of, even as you're an adult, they're trying to run your life, or they are kind of puppet mastering your life. When you try to move on beyond that, they might say things to you, they might try to do things and gaslight you into feeling like you are the one with the problem. So if you try to put up boundaries with a parent or an authority figure in your family, like an uncle or an aunt who is older than you, who helped raise you, it can be very hard to stand up to that behavior. And this is a big deal, particularly because, I know in our culture, in our society, I actually love reading Reddit posts. And one of the big things I hear all the time is talking about mother-in-laws being out of control. And you'll hear all kinds of behavior, directed towards a new wife, or an incoming wife, where the mother is engaging in really disrespectful behavior. And then the husband or fiance is not really backing them up or is defending the mom. And some of the time, unfortunately, what happens is we view that as, oh my God, how weak that man is. Why can't he stand up to his mother? Why can't he do X, Y, and Z? But the problem is that if you have a parent or parental figure who has raised you that way, you've been used to it. You've grown up used to it. That's the only way that you know how to operate. And it really is abusive behavior, right? There is a certain amount of fear. There's a certain amount of like, there's a healthy level of fear for that authority figure, right? So it's a lot more complex than we make it, right? And by the way, this is not only about, I don't want the stereotype of the mother-in-law, by the way. This also goes with other in-laws as well. This is also just beyond the in-law relationship. So I don't want it to be only on mother-in-laws. I have excellent mother-in-laws, but that is the stereotype, right? So this also happens with other family relationships as well too. So many of us experience abuse in those relationships without realizing it, especially if they've been kind of normalized in our culture or kind of played off as a joke. That overbearing mother-in-law has become such a joke and a trope that it really minimizes how serious it is. Also, too, another misconception, is that survivors of abuse have grown up normalizing abusive behavior or they have grown up with low self-esteem. I, for one, it was not normalized in me that it was okay to be a part of an abusive relationship. I didn't see that with my parents, but I did grow up with low self-esteem. I did grow up feeling less than, and I was far more open to validation than I might have been now, right? I needed validation. And so when I was in a relationship with my ex who had abusive behavior, it was like I really desperately needed his validation a lot more than I would today, right? Today, if I was going to be alone, it would suck, but it would be okay. But back then, I really desperately needed a partner and needed to feel as though somebody had chosen me, right? I think people call that the pick me girl. So, but it's, and that's part of what goes into people staying in an abusive relationship is being chosen. And in the beginning of the relationship, again, you're shown a lot of love and care and vulnerability. So it makes you feel really appreciated and loved and valued. Another misconception that people don't understand, and this is a big one, is the empathy that is involved in this relationship. So if you talk to, in a romantic abusive relationship, if you talk to, a woman or a male who is getting abused and you say, the person you're with is evil. They're evil. You need to leave them, get away from them immediately. You may encounter resistance and pushback. Don't be surprised if they don't leave right away, because sometimes, our culture has set up this dynamic where we view people who are abusive as evil, as villains. Right? We might actually draw as a cartoon character that is villainous, but the truth is more complicated than that. People who are abusive are not evil people. They are deeply traumatized people. And my ex had been through a lot. So part of what keeps people staying in these abusive relationships and going back to them time and time again is empathy, is that they're worried about the person with the abusive behavior. Because again, people who engage in abusive behavior are not happy people, right? That's part of the reason why you are acting that way. You are deeply traumatized, maybe even suicidal, right? So there's a lot of empathy and really wanting to make sure that person is okay. You know all of the things that they are suffering with, and you feel empathy for them and you want them to be okay. So that is a huge reason why people keep going back. And also too, this goes into the next point, which is trauma bonding, right? Trauma bonding, because people who are abusive have been through a lot of trauma themselves. And the people who are getting abused, the survivors of it, are also really traumatized as well. I had a lot of trauma. Both my ex and I were both dealing with a lot of trauma, and we were bonding through that. There was this real feeling in that relationship that you are the only one who understands me. You are the only person who gets and feels and understands the depth of my pain. And when you are in a really low, sad, vulnerable place like that, it can be very hard to leave that situation. If you feel like that only that person understands me, where else are you going to go? Okay? It can keep you coming back even if you know that the behavior is not right. And another thing that also comes up another misconception is that there are constant changes that catch you off guard in an abusive relationship. And this goes for romantic, professional, familial friend. Okay. People who tend to be abusive, they tend to be confident and charismatic people, at least on the surface, right? If you scratch the surface, get a little deeper, they're usually not happy people at all. But there's a lot of big talk that comes. And when you go through, you've experienced a really toxic thing that has happened to you, like you've been hit or somebody said something incredibly disrespectful to you, incredibly hurtful to you. Usually, most of us need time and space to process how we feel before we can make a decision about whether or not we want to engage in that relationship. But people who are abusive, they tend to catch you, they tend to get in your face and kind of get you caught up in their charisma, right? So immediately, after saying something disrespectful, immediately following up with the apologies and the I'm sorries, right? And then, when you guys are feeling all good and happy again, then something comes out of nowhere, right? And it just catches you off guard because their behavior is it's hard to pinpoint. It's hard to tell exactly when it's going to come. And they call this walking on eggshells, right? You never really know what you're going to get out of that other person. So you're always off guard. And when you're off guard, you don't really know how to feel. You don't really know how to stop and process how you feel about the whole situation, right? So they usually don't leave you with enough time and space to kind of get your bearings and really focus on what it is that you want long term. Okay, so that can be, and again, if the person is charismatic and popular, as so many people are, as so many abusive people are in the workplace and also in romantic relationships, they can make you doubt your feelings, right? Because again, it feels like they are really popular. They know what they're talking about. They have all the confidence, and maybe you don't really know what you're talking about. Maybe you are overreacting. Maybe you are the one who is causing it. Okay, so I hope that this gives you an idea of some of the misconceptions that come with abuse and hopefully kind of clarifies why it is that people kind of stay in these situations, whether it's at work, whether it's in a family connection with a parent, whether it is in a romantic relationship. And if this is you, if you are stuck in a situation and you're not really sure about what's going on with you, definitely reach out to me. Okay, I'd love to support you. I'd love to hop on a call with you so we can discuss it further. The best way to work your way out of an abusive relationship is to get space from it so you can get real clarity about how you feel, not isolating yourself, so you can hear real opinions and feedback from people who love you, who care about you, who want you to be happy. And so you can hear real valued opinions about, what it is, about how toxic the situation actually is. And then so you can actually process and think about ways to get out of it. And if you are in one where you actually feel physically unsafe, Google hotlines, because there are resources. There are hotlines where if you call them, they will work to help you be safe. They will work with you to come up with a plan so that you don't do anything that's going to jeopardize your safety. Okay? So with that said, I hope that you have an amazing rest of your day. Take care.